This is Hisashi Ouchi, a husband, a father, and by all accounts, a kind man. In 1999, he was just doing his job at a nuclear fuel processing plant, a job he thought was safe. But on September 30th, he was exposed to a blast of radiation so intense, it effectively erased his DNA. For 83 agonizing days, doctors fought to keep him alive as his body literally disintegrated, turning him into a living science experiment. This is the story of the medical mystery of the human reactor. What happens to a person when the very blueprint for their body is shattered? Not by disease, not by an accident you can see, but by an invisible force that shreds the building blocks of life itself. The story of Hisashi Ouchi is more than just a medical case file. It has a terrifying journey to the absolute limits of human endurance and a stark look at the ethical nightmare that begins when medicine can keep a body going long after all hope is lost. It's a story about criminal negligence, a desperate medical battle in uncharted territory, and a man who suffered an ordeal that almost defies imagination. Section 1. The day before disaster. Before September 30th, 1999, the town of Tokaimura was built on the atom. Located roughly 130 kilometers, about 81 miles, northeast of Tokyo, it was a hub of reactors, research labs, and fuel facilities. For thousands of people, including 35-year-old Hisashi Ouchi, the nuclear industry meant a good, stable job. A third of the town's population depended on it. Ouchi was a technician at a plant run by a company called JCO. His facility wasn't a massive power station. It was a smaller, specialized plant that prepared enriched uranium for experimental reactors. And that distinction is critical. Because it was a smaller, boutique operation, it operated under far less regulatory scrutiny. The work was done in batches, and this specific job hadn't been done in 3 years. This environment, combined with immense pressure to cut costs and meet deadlines, had created a culture where official safety protocols were treated as mere suggestions. The company had secretly changed its own procedures without telling regulators, all to save a little time and money. This creeping carelessness was setting the stage for one of the worst nuclear accidents in history. Hisashi Ouchi, his wife, and his young son had no idea that his next shift would be his last, and that he was about to become a global symbol for the horrifying cost of cutting corners. Section 2. The Blue Flash. On the morning of September 30th, Ouchi and 2 colleagues, Masato Shigehara and Yutaka Yukokawa, were assigned to prepare fuel for the Joyo experimental reactor. It was a task they hadn't performed in 3 years, and they were not properly trained for it. The process involved uranium enriched to 18.8%, which is far more potent than the 5% used in standard power plants and required extreme caution. The approved procedure was meticulous, designed to prevent an uncontrolled nuclear reaction at all costs. It involved dissolving uranium oxide in a special tank and transferring it through columns that were specifically designed to be criticality safe, meaning too much material could never gather in one place. But that's not what they did. Pressured by a deadline, the workers took a catastrophic shortcut that had been illegally written into an unauthorized company manual. Instead of using the proper equipment, they started mixing the highly enriched uranium with nitric acid by hand in simple stainless steel buckets. Around 10:35 a.m., Ouchi stood over a large precipitation tank, holding a funnel as Shinohara poured the uranium solution. The legal limit for that tank was 2.4 kilograms of uranium. They poured in nearly 16 kilograms, almost 7 times the approved amount. The instant the 7th bucket tipped in, the solution hit critical mass. A blinding, beautiful, and terrifying blue flash erupted from the tank. It was Cherenkov radiation, the visible signature of an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction. In that one moment, a massive burst of gamma rays and neutron radiation flooded the room, and alarms began to scream. The men had just started a criticality accident. The chain reaction would continue, pulsing on and off, for the next 20 hours. Section 3. The invisible enemy Ouchi was standing closest to the tank, and he absorbed a dose of radiation no human was ever meant to survive. He was immediately knocked over by a wave of pain, nausea, and difficulty breathing before losing consciousness. The three men were rushed to the National Institute of Radiological Sciences. When Ouchi arrived, he looked surprisingly normal, aside from a slightly red and swollen face. He complained of pain, but there were no burns, no obvious wounds. Beneath the surface, however, a war had already been lost. Doctors measured the radiation. The numbers were hard to comprehend. A dose of 7 Sieverts is considered fatal. His colleague, Masato Shinohara, had absorbed around 10 Sieverts. Their supervisor, Yutaka Yokokawa, who was in another room, got 3 Sieverts. Hisashi Ouchi had been blasted with an estimated 17 Sieverts, the highest radiation dose any human is known to have ever received in an accident. The proof was in his blood. His chromosomes were ravaged. More pressingly, the radiation had destroyed the cells that produced the body's defenders. Within days, his white blood cell count dropped to virtually 0. He no longer had an immune system. He was completely defenseless against infection. The invisible enemy had already won. The only question was how long his body would take to fall apart. Section 4. A body without a blueprint. To understand what happened to Hisashi Ouchi, a young Japanese man in his mid-20s, you have to imagine DNA as the body's master blueprint. Your chromosomes hold the instructions for everything: how to make new cells, how to heal, how to build skin, bone, and blood. The 17 Sieverts of radiation that hit Ouchi's body acted like a microscopic shredder. When doctors at the University of Tokyo Hospital looked at his chromosomes, they were shattered and broken. Some were unrecognizable. The blueprint for Hisashi Ouchi had been wiped clean. His body had lost the ability to build itself. This is the grim reality of acute radiation syndrome. It isn't a poison. It's the complete destruction of the body's ability to regenerate. The fastest dividing cells go first. That's why his immune system vanished. It's also why the lining of his digestive tract disintegrated, causing massive internal bleeding and making it impossible to absorb nutrients. Then came his skin. Your body is constantly replacing skin cells, but Ouchi's couldn't. What began as red marks soon became a living nightmare. Medical tape would rip his skin off with it. His outer layer, the epidermis, began to slough off in sheets, exposing raw, weeping tissue. He was losing enormous amounts of fluid, up to 10 liters a day, through skin that was no longer there. His body was literally dissolving. Section 5. The medical battle, the 83-day experiment. Faced with a patient whose basic biology had been annihilated, doctors at the University of Tokyo Hospital entered territory no one ever wants to see. Ouchi was placed in a special ward to shield him from germs, since a simple infection would kill him instantly. What happened over the next 83 days would blur the line between saving a life and prolonging a death. The medical team's first bold move was an attempt to rebuild his immune system. In a world first for a radiation victim, they performed a stem cell transplant using cells donated by his sister. The hope was that these healthy cells would take root in his bone marrow and start producing new blood cells. For a brief moment, it seemed to be working a tiny flicker of hope. But the radiation still saturating his body was so intense that it damaged the newly transplanted cells, and the transplant failed. The interventions became a relentless, grueling cycle. He was given dozens of blood transfusions. Doctors tried skin grafts, but they wouldn't take. There was no underlying tissue for them to attach to. Every procedure was a monument to the power of modern medicine and its utter helplessness against this level of damage. Through it all, Ouchi's pain was unimaginable. His body was a landscape of open wounds. He was kept in a medically induced coma for long periods, but even in his unconscious state, the horror continued. At one point, he began to weep tears of blood. He was kept alive by a fleet of machines breathing for him, cleaning his blood, and pumping drugs into him to keep his heart beating. He had become a living case study in the slow, systematic destruction. Section 6. The Ethical Dilemma. A plea to stop as the weeks turned into months. A painful ethical crisis began to unfold. The medical team was doing everything possible to keep Ouchi's body functioning. But why? There was zero chance of recovery. His suffering was beyond measure. In brief moments of consciousness, Ouchi made his wishes horrifyingly clear. He reportedly told nurses, "I can't take it anymore, and I am not a guinea pig." He pleaded to go home. He cried out for his mother. He was a conscious mind trapped inside a body that was coming apart. His family, caught in an impossible nightmare, initially asked the doctors to do everything they could. It's a natural response to cling to any hope medicine can offer. But as his condition went from bad to worse, the purpose of the treatment became a source of controversy. Was this compassionate care, or was it a form of torture in the name of science? The debate grew. Some argued that the doctors were gathering priceless data that could save lives in the future. Others saw it as a monstrous violation of a dying man's dignity, keeping his body alive against his will, simply for observation. The medical staff themselves were traumatized, caught between their duty to save a life and the horrifying evidence that the life they were preserving was nothing but pain. Section 7. The Final Days and the Aftermath. By day 59, what was left of Hisashi Ouchi's body finally started to give out. His heart stopped. The team revived him. It stopped again. They revived him again. In just 1 hour, he suffered 3 cardiac arrests. Each time, at the family's request, he was brought back, an act that also caused further damage to his oxygen-starved brain. He was no longer recognizable. Finally, the medical team sat down with the family and explained the grim reality. There was no coming back from this. His wife had hoped he might live to see the new millennium, the year 2000, but on day 81, the family agreed to a do not resuscitate order. On December 21, 1999, the 83rd day, Hisashi Ouchi's heart gave out one last time. This time, no heroic measures were taken. This time, his suffering ended. He was pronounced dead. His colleagues met their own terrible fates. Masato Shinohara, who had received 10 Sieverts, fought for 211 days. Despite numerous treatments, including stem cells from an umbilical cord, he succumbed to multiple organ failure and died in April 2000. Their supervisor, Yutaka Yokokawa, survived his 3 Sievert exposure and was released from the hospital after 3 months, only to later face criminal charges for negligence. Section 8. Legacy of a Tragedy. The death of Hisashi Ouchi was more than a personal tragedy. It was a national wake-up call. The investigation revealed a staggering level of corporate negligence. It was confirmed that JCO had knowingly used illegal procedures for years and that worker training was dangerously inadequate. The state regulator had also been lax, having only visited the plant twice a year and never during operations. In the aftermath, JCO's operating license was revoked the first time in Japan's history. A plant operator had been punished under nuclear law. The company paid $121 million to settle thousands of claims from residents, businesses, and other workers who were exposed. 6 officials were charged and found guilty of professional negligence. The accident forced a complete overhaul of Japan's nuclear safety and training protocols. The medical legacy is just as powerful. The 83-day record of Ouchi's treatment is now a cornerstone of medical ethics education around the world. It forces us to ask the hardest questions. When does treatment become torture? What is the true meaning of life when machines are doing all the living? And what is a doctor's ultimate duty to the body or to the person? Conclusion. The story of Hisashi Ouchi ends where it started, with a catastrophic failure of human responsibility. An accident born from carelessness turned a man into a human reactor, unleashing an invisible force that unmade him, piece by piece. For 83 days, science went to war with biology, and in the end, nobody won. There was only suffering and the brutal lessons that came from it. Hisashi Ouchi never chose to be a hero or a martyr. He was a husband and father who went to work one day and simply never came home. But his horrific ordeal serves as a violent, undeniable reminder of the consequences of nuclear power when safety is an afterthought. His body became a battlefield, and his suffering a terrible warning. The medical mystery was solved, revealing a truth more horrifying than anyone could have imagined, that a body can be kept alive long after the person inside has already been lost.